Welcome back to another edition of Political Breakfast right here on WABE. Joining me are Brian Robinson, Tharon Johnson, and our producer, Lily Oppenheimer. This is our second edition for the week. A lot going on here in Georgia. A lot of people aren't talking about this, but I don't know, Brian and Tharon, you seem to think people should because it is important. It really is in the long run. The Public Service Commission election, it's coming up. The general election coming up in November. Voters selected the candidates in a June 17th primary and a July 15th primary runoff. And, they set our electricity and gas rates. And Brian, you were kind of talking last week of just how important this is and why people should wake up and pay attention to this. Why?
It's hugely important, and it's something that is tricky because people don't know who their public service commissioners are. They don't know who or what that board does. Well, to sum it up quickly, what matters most to folks is they work on the rates for Georgia Power. They do not set the rates for the EMC customers throughout the state, but they're also involved in telecommunications and broadband and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of stuff that's really kitchen table, bread and butter issues for Georgians. But it is the power rates that seem to really break through because that is it's so important, so essential to the family budget. And there's a lot of angst right now because cost on families have gone up across the board, whether it's for groceries, energy, housing, healthcare, etc. And you can't let this election become a referendum on your power bill. Everybody's power bills around the world have gone up over recent years, and part of this inflationary pressures that we've been seeing. So Georgia, the way it should be measured is how do we rank with other states? And we continue to be below the national average. While at the same time, the Public Service Commission has made investments, and some of these are expensive investments because this stuff costs a lot of money to make sure that we have energy resilience going into the future. We did put a lot of money into Plant Vogtle, two new nuclear reactors over in Burke County. That cost a lot of money, but it's going to serve the state for generations. So it's huge. It's really important. And we're going to spread that cost out over that time. What it comes down to for Republicans is not, are you happy with your power bill right now? It is, how do we rate amongst the states? And what would Democrats do if they got these seats? It is my view as a Republican that they're going to be interested in green energy mandates. They're going to be interested in forcing the state to increase the amount of its renewable energy portfolio at a cost of more dependable and reliable sources of power. The Republicans have been really good about being for an all of the above strategy. They're not against renewables. We've seen a boom in solar, for example, in this state. And we've been able, that reliability has allowed us to freeze rates for the next 3 years. I don't think that would have happened under Democrat control. We're seeing in blue states that energy prices are going up tremendously because of these mandates that are coming down from the left. California just added a $25 surcharge per bill. That really hits working class families hard because it's a regressive tax on California power customers. So, these are the things that should matter to voters.
Yeah. All 5 seats are currently held by Republicans there. And in your opinion, is that why people should wake up?
Well, let's give it a little bit more context. Number one, Democrats, Lisa, and you know this because you've been a journalist in this state now for a couple decades. We have not held a constitutional office in Georgia since 15 years ago, 2010. I mean, we lost the governor's race in 2002. So just to make it very plain for our listeners, we started seeing a decline of Democratic representation and leadership across the state of Georgia 23 years ago. So next year will mark 24 years that we've been without a, sort of a representation of multiple Democrats. And I think the last person to do that was, again, around the 2010 area when Michael Thurman ran for U.S. Senate, but he was still labor commissioner. And I feel like there were maybe a couple others as well. So once you look at this from just a programmatic standpoint, Democrats are for a lot of what B. Rob just talked about. Mm-hmm. It's an all-above strategy as well. It just becomes a question around prioritization. And yes, there are costs. Democrats, once I believe Georgia Power, who did a great job, by the way, of making the case that we need to freeze the rates a 3-year freeze. I think Democrats, if we had had them on the commission, that would have been an alternative that we would have strongly considered. The unfortunate thing about this whole race, Lisa, is that it is a partisan position, and you got to choose a side. And what the Republicans are doing is saying, well, if Democrats are elected, they're going to do everything opposite of what the PSC has done so far. Well, we don't know that because we have not had a PAC, member on the actual Public Service Commission now for, almost 2 decades, if, a little less. So I think what this race really comes down to with the 2 Democratic candidates, Hubbard and Johnson, is can you create enough education about what the PSC is doing and not doing in their minds, but also get folks to come out in a statewide election where there's not many elections going on in their areas. On some areas of the state, this is the only election that's on the ballot, possibly, or it's probably the only one that they may understand of significance because a lot of incumbents are either going unopposed or they're not having really serious opposition. I will say this, though, is that even some of these utility companies are doing everything they can to reduce the amount of electricity. And they would say, look, it is high. But as B-Rob just said, and I do agree with him, we are still lower than the national average. We've made significant investments in Plant Vogtle, but more importantly, into our grid. Fortunately, we don't see those bad stories like we see over in Texas, where people are without power for weeks and weeks and months. But the truth of the matter is that the PSC has not had a race of significance, Lisa, partly also because it wasn't on the ballot the last time in 2022 or 2024. It would have been on the ballot in 2022, but correct me if I'm wrong, B-Rob, but we had a court case that tied up the whether or not they should change the representation and how the districts are represented. So, Fitz Johnson and Tim Echols, who are the incumbents, were just patiently kind of waiting to see who they were going to run against, but also see where their elections were going to be. So I think that there's enough buzz out there, Lisa, where we've talked about it a lot on this podcast, where people at least now know what the Public Service Commission is, what it does every day. I think there's still room for education there. The question then becomes, are there a lot of people that are going to come out and say, hey, I want to keep things as they are, even though they're not perfect, but they're better than most states? Or do we want to change it up? And if so, what do we want to change? And why hasn't these incumbents been able to change it? Or will they change it? And that's where I think a lot of money is being spent on some of the advertisement that I'm getting. And they're tying it to, hey, vote to lower your electricity bills. And that's kind of a strategy that Democrats are using. But the truth of the matter is our electricity bills are going to remain the same the next 3 years because of the rate hike freeze that would just be in place. So, it's something that is very important to us. We got women and men on that commission that wake up every day who make sure that there's checks and balances. They do hold the utilities accountable. They really do. But we have rising costs. More people are moving to this state. We have data centers. We have more affordable goals that we got to meet. And I think the PSC and these utilities and other folks all play a role in that. But there is some legitimate concerns out there from folks in the environmental community about cost and some legitimate concerns about are we being as smart as we possibly can for the future when it comes to clean, reliable, affordable energy in the state.
I got a text earlier this morning from Public Service Commissioner Tricia Pridemore, who's a friend of Tharon and mine. I know she sometimes slides into Tharon's DMs. And what she sent me was information from FERC, a federal agency, comparing state-by-state cost. And she sent me this quote: states such as Connecticut saw 31 cents per kilowatt hour of electricity in May. Georgia is less than half that at 15 cents per kilowatt hour. The policies of blue states are seeing twice the bills of Georgians. So that's from one of the Republican commissioners on the Public Service Commission. And I think that kind of boils it down. Tharon's right. The Democrat argument is, hey, we're going to make your bills lower. The thing is that they're not, but that is certainly going to be their message. And it's a very easy message. I mean, that's what I would do if I'm in opposition. I'm the challenger to an incumbent. Hey, make the whole race a referendum on your power bill, because no one thinks they pay too little. No one thinks they pay a fair price, regardless of if they do or not, right? Everyone thinks I'm paying too much. So it's an easier message. Also, I think Democrats have an advantage right now, even though they have raised much less money. There's a story in the AJC about the fundraising differential. But somebody, some outside group is helping these Democrats. That's these ads that Tharon has seen. He's being served up ads on behalf of the Democrats from outside groups. So it's not just that fundraising by the candidates themselves that matter here, but municipalities around the state are having elections at the same time. And so some areas have local elections, some don't. The ones that do tend to be bigger cities with more Democratic populations. So there's going to be a built in Democrat advantage. Republicans are taking this seriously. They are activating their get out the vote operations. All weekend long, I saw people posting on social media of them door knocking, sign waving, trying to get Republicans activated and out there. Last week, after we taped, I went to Cumming for an event with Governor Kemp to sort of rally Republican voters in North Georgia to show up. You know, Cumming's a great example. It's a tiny little city in a big Republican county, but almost all the people in the county live in unincorporated areas. So we got to go activate those Republicans in unincorporated areas. And that's what you're seeing Republicans focus on. And look, when early voting numbers start to come in and the polls opened on Tuesday, we're going to see where people are showing up. And you're going to want to see good turnout in North Georgia, parts of rural Georgia, in exurban counties like Fayette, Cherokee, for example. That's what we're going to be looking for. If you just see a massive turnout in Atlanta because of city elections, and then in Augusta and Macon for city elections, it's going to create a deficit that's going to have to be backfilled by just grabbing people and taking them to the polls on my side.
Yeah, no, I mean that, and that's good. And again, Lisa, the thing about it is, honestly, I'm trying to be sort of objective here. It is a Democrat versus Republican messages, right? And I think that, as you just heard a top Republican operative, Brian Robinson, say, "Hey, look, if there's ways that we can lower our electricity bills, absolutely. Who's not for that, right? But at the same time, it's how we do it. So the goal here is to make sure that people are informed, and what you're hearing from both sides of the aisle are partisan messages about what they're getting and what they're not getting. Turnout is going to be extremely key, and early vote is going to be very important, because you got to think that there's a very informed electorate out there right now who've already made up their minds of how they're going to vote in this election. The question then becomes, what are the folks who are really not paying attention right now? What's going to be the last thing they hear, and what are they informed about as far as their thoughts on this election? Again, I will make the point. Republicans and Democrats want to work together to figure out how they can lower the cost of our electricity bills. I think that's something that even the utilities are trying to figure out. But it becomes the methodology and sort of the programs in place and what you're going to do it. Now, Brian makes a good point. Money is important. When you got the governor of Georgia fundraising for these PSC candidates, and you got him out here really, really making sure that he does everything he can to get the vote out, he understands that this is a barometer. This is sort of a test to what we think next year's election is going to be like. But I would tell you this. I think that the outside groups, yes, they're definitely weighing in on this. But these two candidates, many of whom are really getting to know on the Democratic side, are really making some legitimate points. And the data that B-Rob just mentioned from our good friend Trisha Pridemore, who, by the way, can slide up in my DM anytime she wants to, is definitely a selling point. But B-Rob and Trisha also knows that while we are comparable to, you notice he said blue states there, Georgia is just a very different place. And Georgia is a place where everyone is feeling the crunch right now with the economy that's not going as well as it should. And there's just, like you said, the cost of living is just so high right now, Lisa, where electricity bills are always some of the things that, from the time I've known, that my grandmother has always said, oh my God, I got to make sure you turn off those lights because we don't want to pay this high ass light bill. And that's something that's been, in my life forever. So there are things that the utilities are encouraging people to do to lower costs. But this election is going to be about, have the people on the PSC commission done everything they possibly can to try to lower costs? And I think they have an answer to that question, right? And one of them is going to be they froze the rates with Georgia Power's recommendation. Mm-hmm. The second question then becomes is, what are you going to do about it in the future? And then it also talks about the roles and responsibilities of this position. So a lot to talk about. But early voting is going to be so key for both sides of the aisle to see who's going to be able to turn out their voters.
Yeah, 2 seats on the ballot, District 2, that's East Georgia, and District 3, Cobb, DeKalb, and Fulton counties. So,
And Theron's totally right about the barometer issue in that Republican voters need to understand you got to turn out for this election that maybe you don't care about right now or don't know much about and just vote for the team. That's what you need to do because everything's up for grabs in 2026. We can't signal to Democrat donors around the country or to the DNC that there's blood in the water here. We got to show that this is still a reliably red state. So show up and go vote. If you're a Republican, it's really important. I know I've mentioned this before. Tharon and I write columns for Georgia Trend magazine as well. My column for this month is about this issue, about that barometer issue that Tharon mentioned. So please check that out.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll do it again next week. Have a wonderful, wonderful week.